So one of the questions I get asked all the time is, why is increasing the pension so expensive? They just don't see why it costs so much. Obviously, when the FAE cap increases, people see that times the number of pilots times the life expectancy incurs a cost. But what they don't see is the pension benefit obligation, or PBO, that's behind all that nobody actually benefits from. So here's a short fireside chat with Pizza Pat to explain how that actually is a cost the company has to pay when increasing the FAE. It goes back to 2008. In 2008, obviously, with the Great Recession, there were a lot of companies that had pensions that were subsequently raided in order to fund lots of various company endeavors, capital investments, restructuring, and paying off executives. There was an outrage in America, and the end result was that the PBGC was established out of this. So the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation mandated funding requirements for anybody with a pension, but they also provided insurance premiums that companies would have to buy should their pension not be fully funded to meet the pension benefit obligation to all of the vested members. So what does that mean? First is funding. So if a pension is fully funded at 100% to meet all of its obligations, then no premium from the PBGC needs to be purchased. If, however, the pension falls below meeting 100% of its obligations, then they have to buy essentially gap insurance in order to fulfill that obligation should the company go defunct. This goes down to about 80%. Anything more than 80%, the company can voluntarily choose to contribute money to their pension fund. However, as you can imagine, with insurance, the more risk, the more insurance. So if your company is 80% funded, then your premium is going to be higher than if it were, say, 90% funded to meet its obligations. The other criteria is if you fell below the minimum funding requirement of, say, 80%, that then there were penalties and obligatory contributions. And this is where often people get confused, hearing that the company is making voluntary contributions to the pension, and therefore the pension is fully funded. That's not exactly the case. What they're doing is they're decreasing the amount of premium that they pay by putting more of their funds into, more of their capital investment into the pension fund. So what it comes down to is an actuarial accounting practice as to, does the company have a large capital expenditure that they expect to get a rate of return on, and that is going to be higher than the premiums that they have to pay to the PBGC if their funding is less than 100% to meet the obligations. So if the company wanted to spend, say, $3 billion to build a super hub, that they expect to increase profits by X number of dollars, and that X number of dollars is more than the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation premiums, well, then, of course, they would make the capital investment. But if they don't have capital investments on the horizon, then they will put excess cash into the pension fund in order to decrease the premiums. It's just a math problem. So now the next thing that comes into account is the company's savings rate. All right, what we have on the next slide is, on the y-axis, the money saved, and over the bottom is in years from a new hire until retirement at the end of the graph. So as you can see with the bottom line, if the FAE cap is where it currently is, the company saves the preponderance of the money towards the end of a pilot's career, with very little being saved for them as they're a new hire. This makes sense because if the company has access to more money earlier, then compounding interest for their investment before they have to pay out the obligation makes sense to use that to their advantage. And then as they get closer to having to pay out the obligation, then they have to increase the contributions in order to meet that. If you are to increase the FAE cap with the upper line, then what you can see is that the area under the curve here is significantly higher. Now this is because the FAE cap went up, but now the pension is completely short of its funding obligations. Consider the previous rejected TA pension improvement, where there was a 3-year seasoning period in order to meet the maximum amount of the 169K from 130K. This gave the company 3 years to save to essentially fill the line from here over to the right of the graph. Okay, what we're asking for now is a no years of service to achieve maximum benefit, thus exponentially increasing the amount of funding that the company has to put into the fund to not be delinquent on its minimum funding level, which of course would require penalties. So what this balances out to is essentially, for every dollar in FAE cap increase, it is approximately $3 to $4 of pension benefit obligation that needs to be contributed that no one actually benefits from. And so this is why when people say, I don't see why it's costs so much, it's because they don't see the math that they have to account for on the backside, or the company has to account for on the backside. And you cannot have one without the other. They both go hand in hand. So increasing one will increase the non-beneficial PBO by a ratio of almost 1 to 4. I hope this helps. Hit me up with questions.